In this video, we'll be talking about how to start a new project in Premiere Pro, and I'll be giving you an overview of how Premiere Pro works, so let's get into it. So once you have all your folders organized like we showed you in the previous video, you'll go ahead and open up Premiere Pro. The first thing you do is go ahead and click on New Project, and then you will name your project and then select Browse and locate the folder where you will want to put your Premiere Pro project file and select Choose. Then go ahead and click OK and you'll have your project open up. You'll now see that you are in the editing window, and if you click any other window, the layout will change. You can change the window either by clicking on these options at the top of the screen, or you can go up to Window, Workspace, and you can choose the window that you'd like to edit with. For now, we'll only focus on the editing window, but we'll get into some of these other ones a bit further in the course. So go ahead and make sure that you have the editing window selected, and now we're going to import your footage, and there are two ways to do this. You can either go to File, Import, and select the folder that has your footage in it, or you can double click this bottom left window where it says Import Media to start, and then you can go ahead and locate your footage folder and then select Import. So now that you can see that your footage is imported, and you will see it either in the list view, the icon view, or the freeform view. I always prefer to have my footage in the list view, so make sure that is selected, and then you can go ahead and expand your folder and see all your footage in that folder. So now you're going to create a new sequence, and you can do this by one of two ways. You can either select your whole folder and just click and drag it into the timeline section where it says drop media here to create a new sequence, or you can select the folder and drag it down to this icon here called new item, and it will do the exact same thing. So what this does is it takes the settings of the first video file in your folder, and it uses those settings to create a new sequence. So if you have footage in that folder with different frame rates or different resolutions, then you need to make sure that you modify them to the settings that you'll be shooting in. So for example, let's say that you have some footage shot in 24 frames per second and some footage shot in 60 frames per second. Then before creating a new sequence, you'll have to select all your footage, right click, and then select Modify, Interpret Footage, click Assume this frame rate, and then type in 23.976. Then click OK, and you will see that it will slow all your 60 frames per second footage down so that it's in the right frame rate for editing. And let's say that you have some footage in 4K and some footage in 1080p. Once you create your new sequence, you will select all your footage, right click, and then select Scale to Frame Size. A lot of people have also asked me the question if you have different frame sizes like 1080p and 4K footage, if you should have a 4K sequence or a 1080p sequence. And I would just say go with whatever the majority of your footage is shot in. If the majority of your sequence is shot in 4K, then go ahead and use a 4K sequence. And then if the majority of your footage is shot in 1080p, you'd want a 1080p sequence. If you want to double check and see what your sequence settings are, go up to Sequence and click Settings. And you will see that the important things to look for here is the time base, which should be 23.976 frames per second, and the frame size, which should be 1920 by 1080p if you're shooting in 1080p, or 3840 by 2160 if you're shooting in 4K. And there are a few other settings in here that you might see, like for example, if you're shooting with the 1DX Mark II in 4K, then the sequence settings are 4096 by 2160. So it just depends a lot on the camera that you're shooting on. If you ever want to change your sequence settings, you can do so here. So let's say you want to make your video more widescreen, you can just lower the number of vertical pixels and it will make your video more widescreen. Let's say you want a square video, you can make your vertical pixels the same number as your horizontal pixels, like for example 1920 by 1920, and it will make your sequence square. So now that you have your sequence, let me walk you through the different panels inside Premiere Pro and what they do. Let's start with the Effects panel in the upper left-hand corner. Once you select a clip, you can now adjust the clip however you want. You can adjust the position, scale, the rotation, the opacity, etc. This is useful if you have a clip that isn't framed correctly, and to make it have a better composition, you can punch in by increasing the scale, and then you can adjust the position to frame it how you'd like. Now, a really cool thing that you can do is you can set keyframes for any one of these parameters. So let's say that you want to have a slow zoom in on one of your clips. You can go to the beginning of the clip and set a keyframe on the position and the scale by clicking the stopwatch icon, and then you can go to the end of the clip and zoom in on the scale, which creates a new keyframe, and now there is a slow zoom on your clip as it goes from one keyframe to the other. You can also get pretty fancy with these keyframes by selecting the keyframes, right click, and go to temporal interpolation, and then select either ease in or ease out, which makes it so the keyframe eases into the movement and doesn't just abruptly start moving or stop moving. If you ever want to resort the keyframe back to where it was originally, just hit the reset parameter button. And then any other time that you add an effect to a clip, you'll see your effect controls here in this panel. Now moving on to the top right panel, which is also called the program panel. This is where you view your video. You can also click and drag the black bars in between the panels to make them bigger or smaller, and I usually like to have my program panel the biggest one so that I can see the video well. With this panel, if Premiere is ever struggling to play back your video, you can adjust the resolution that it's playing back at by selecting this button and choosing a lower resolution for it to play back at. Another helpful tool in this panel is to click the camera button if you ever want to take a screenshot of the frame that you're on, and you can save that screenshot as either a JPEG or a PNG. Also, always make sure that the zoom level is always set to fit. And if you're editing with two monitors like I am, you can go up here and click this triple line button and select Undock Panel, which then allows you to move the panel to another external monitor. Moving on to the bottom left panel, this is where you have all of your footage and other assets in the Project tab, and the only other tab that I use is the Effects tab, and this is where you can go look through all of your video and audio effects and transitions. If you want to use a certain effect or transition, just click the effect and drag it to the clip that you want to apply it to. And now moving on to the bottom right panel, this is your timeline that has all of your footage on it. We'll talk about how to cut and edit your footage in another video, but for now you need to know that you can have different layers of clips on top of each other. I often do this when I have a music video with multiple takes, but if you drag your playhead over a certain clip, it will highlight that clip only if the track is highlighted in blue over where it says V1, V2, and so on. So as you can see here, I have clips on track 1 and track 2, but as I move my playhead through the timeline, it only selects clips on track 1. But once I highlight V2, you can see that it selects all the clips as I move the playhead through the clips. Another useful thing in this panel is the I button. You can toggle this on or off to see only certain tracks that you want to see. So let's say, for example, I shoot a music video and I have 5 different takes. I can turn off seeing all the tracks by untoggling the I button, and then I can select the I button on only the track that I want to look at. Another useful tool is the lock button. You can lock certain tracks so that everything that you do only applies to the track or tracks that are unlocked. Another thing to note on this bottom right panel is to make sure that you always have the magnet button turned on, which allows your clips to snap together on the timeline. And then for the audio tracks, you can mute an audio track by clicking the M button and solo an audio track by clicking the S button. But that's it for this video. Hopefully this helps give you an idea of the layout of Premiere. Also make sure that you watch the next video where we'll be talking about my personal set of keyboard shortcuts so that you can edit quickly and efficiently. We'll see you there.